The story of Samuel in our Old Testament this morning is one that I've always loved. Because it made me have to think about how many times in my life and how many times in maybe our lives does God call and we kind of don't know who's speaking. Seeing Samuel keep waking up and running and saying, "Hey, I'm here." And of course hearing, "Well, wait, I didn't call you. Go back to bed." But Samuel's response of coming and showing up, "I am here, I am here," is something that I think is what we are being called to in all of our lives. Every morning, I feel that God calls us, and we have the choice in the morning whether or not we are going to respond. This week, as I was sitting there preparing my sermon, I kept hearing this theme of God's calling and us answering. And it made me think that sometimes to answer the call of God is not an easy one. It is not one that is always warm fuzzy. But it's one that we answer every day of our lives. Every time around this year, around Martin Luther King Day, I have a little tradition. I sit down and I read letters from a Birmingham jail cell. And then I read the I Have a Dream speech. And this year, the words of I Have a Dream hit me deeper than they ever have before. We watch the news, we read the newspaper, we watch Facebook, and we see how divided our world is right now. And yet, even in the midst of the chaos and in the midst of everything going on, God is still calling us to answer God's call, to advocate for justice and peace, to advocate for a place where all people are created equal. This week, we are going to be in the world spotlight on Wednesday. And I have hope. I have hope for what's going to come next. But I also find myself anxious and worried. So I invite you this Wednesday to enter into a time of prayer. Whatever that looks like. You can do morning prayer. You can just offer prayer in yourself. You can sit in meditation and just sit and be with God and hear for where God is calling you into this new life. So this morning, rather than rambling on for 20 minutes, I want to share with you some of the most beautiful prose that have ever been spoken. And I want you to hear where God is calling in these words. These words are from Dr. Martin Luther King. 50 years ago, a great nation in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames with withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languishing in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. So we have come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. In a sense, we have come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote those magnificent words of the Constitution and Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed an inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as their citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro, a people, a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. So we have come to cash this check, a check that will give us demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice. We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of radical justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of this moment. This sweltering summer of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until there is an invigorating autumn of freedom and of equity. 1963 is not an end but a beginning. Those who hope that the Negro need to blow off steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. There will neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted his citizenship rights. The whirlwinds of revolt will come to shake the foundations of our nation until the bright day of justice emerges. But there is something that I must say to my people who stand on the warm threshold that leads to this palace of justice. In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protests to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. The marvelous new militancy which of our white brothers has evidenced by their presence here today have come to realize that their destiny is tied up with our destiny. That they have come to realize that their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom. We cannot walk alone. We must walk. We must take the pledge that we shall always march ahead. We cannot turn back. There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied as long as our bodies, heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in motels of the highways and in the hotels of cities. We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped off of their selfhood and robed with the dignity by signs saying, "For whites only." We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and the Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. No, we are not satisfied. And we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. I am not unmindful that some of you have come here out of great trials and tribulations. Some of you have come fresh from narrow jail cells. Some of you have come from areas where your quest for freedom left you battered by the storms of persecution and staggered by the winds of police brutality. You have been the veterans of creative suffering. Continue to work with the faith that unearned suffering is redemptive. Go back to Mississippi, go back to Alabama, go back to South Carolina, go back to Georgia, go back to Louisiana, go back to the slums and the ghettos of our northern cities, knowing that somehow this situation can and will be changed. Let us not wallow in the valley of despair. I say to you today, my friends, so even that we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out of the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be to sit down at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that even one day the state of Mississippi, the state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day down in Alabama, with its vicious riots, with its governor having their lips drinking from the words of interposition and nullification, one day right here in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and little white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. I have a dream that every day, every valley shall be exalted, every hill and mountain shall be made low, and rough places will be made plain, and crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is the faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords from our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, and to stand up for freedom together, knowing that one day we will be free. This will be the day when all God's children will be able to sing with a new meaning, "My country 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land where the pilgrims pride, from every mountainside let freedom ring." And if America is to be a great nation, this must come true. So let's fight. Let freedom ring from the prestigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring of the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from every snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring in the Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And when this happens, and when we allow freedom to ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet and every state and every city, we will be able to speed up the day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, "Free at last, thank God Almighty, freed at last." And may His words come true in all that we do.